So you guys have, you've learned about some body systems, like you said, in health. So if we think back to the organization of living things, what is the simplest level of organization of living things? No, that you're thinking of tasks. Cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. When cells work together, they form what? Tissues. When tissues work together, they form organs, organ systems. So we are going to be talking about human organ systems. The organ systems in a human are similar to lots of other animals. Okay? But we're going to be focusing on the human body systems, as we would call them, human organ systems. And we will go through pretty much all of them, although we are not going to go into much detail on at least one of them. So the one we are not going to get into extensively is the integumentary system. So the integumentary system is basically our body's covering of skin, hair, our nails are part of this. And our body's integumentary system actually has some important roles. It helps waterproof us so we don't dehydrate. It helps protect us from pathogens like bacteria and viruses. It's part of our excretory system as well. Helps regulate temperature. It has lots of different functions. They're sort of related to many of these other body systems. So the ones we're going to talk about are skeletal and muscular. We'll talk about them together. We'll talk about the nervous system, endocrine, circulatory, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, excretory, and reproductive systems. So we're going through all of those, and for each one we'll basically follow a pattern. We'll talk about the major organs of that system. We'll talk about some possible malfunctions in that system, and move through them like that. So all of these systems together, their purpose is to help to maintain homeostasis. It's an important word to know. And we've used it before. It means to keep things balanced, to maintain the proper conditions for life. So we're going to kick things off here by talking about the skeletal system. How many bones in the body?
206.
All right, so that's something I know you have. And these bones have several functions. So our skeletal system, which is made of all of our bones, helps protect some vital organs in our body. They also provide the structure of our body. And so when we talk about the bones, really the bones are organs of the skeletal system. And so a bone is made of bone tissue. It's a living tissue. We kind of think of our bones like almost like fingernails or something like just this hard structure that's made. But there's actually blood vessels. There are nerves that go through the bone. It is a living tissue. It is just a hard living tissue. And in the middle of our bones, there is a substance called bone marrow. And the bone marrow is really important, especially in our circulatory system, because the bone marrow helps to produce our blood cells. They're made within our bones. Keeping all of our bones together are ligaments. Ligaments are special types. So some of these things we're talking about are called connective tissues. Connective tissue are very tough, strong, durable tissue that connects various parts of our skeletal and muscular system together. What is a ligament? Probably you can't name very many ligaments, but I bet there's one you are familiar with. Tyler? No? Yeah. Ali?
Oh, no, I have a question.
Well, first, before I get there, anyone ever hear of a ligament that you might know its name because it is commonly injured in sports?
Oh,
ACL.
Yeah, ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, is a ligament in our knee. And it's sometimes not a meniscus. It's sometimes meniscus is a cartilage that's in your knee as well. And ligaments help stabilize our joints. Like your ACL, your anterior cruciate ligament, is a ligament that goes through your knee, and it helps prevent forward and backward movement at the knee joint because that's not supposed to happen. And this is a ligament that can be damaged in different situations, especially it's frequently damaged in sports. Tendons are what connects muscle to bones. So our muscles pull on our bones and move them. And the way that they attach to our bones is the muscle basically turns into a tendon, which is anchored at the bone. And I guess there's probably a couple tendons maybe you could name.
Patella.
Patellar tendon is the one in front of your, and the top of your knee, below your kneecap. That's your patellar tendon. A lot of people might have pain in their patellar tendon with overuse. It's called runner's knee. Sometimes people wear those little bands across there that help that pain feel a little bit better. Yeah, what about another famous tendon? Abby?
Achilles tendon.
Your Achilles tendon is the back of your heel. So when you feel just above like where your shoes are, that's not bone. Although it feels like really strong and hard, that is your Achilles tendon. It's what attaches your calf muscle to your heel bone so that you can move your foot at your ankle. Why is it called Achilles tendon?
I know this one. I know the story. It's Dawn.
So who is Achilles?
Achilles was a
Go ahead.
Roman war hero, and he was dipped in the river Styx, and his mother held him by his tendon. That was the only part that was like that wasn't covered.
That was
and
vulnerable.
Vulnerable, and that was where he was like mortal. Everywhere else he was immortal, he was impenetrable, and then he died by getting struck by an arrow there.
Where?
Achilles.
No, where was this battle?
Oh,
Troy. Yeah.
yeah.
All right, good mythology or whatever you want to call that. So our tendons pull on our bones. Our muscles are attached to tendons, which attach to bones. So as our muscles contract, they pull on our bones, allowing us to move. And then we have another type of connective tissue, cartilage. Cartilage is a connective tissue that helps to cushion between bones. So in your knee, okay, up here, you have these bands of cartilage. And they provide sort of a softer, so that bones are not directly on top of bones. And so there's some cushioning there so the bones don't damage each other. Now you can damage, like Jack mentioned, the meniscus. So meniscus is a piece of cartilage in the knee. So I tore my meniscus. And then they had to do surgery and remove basically all of it. So now, because I don't have this cushioning there in one of my knees, I'm much more likely to develop arthritis as I get older, because now my knee is missing some of that cushioning material. Yeah. And that so it helps reduce friction, makes it easier for the bones to move. And typically as people get older, their cartilage can start to break down, and that's what happened.
I'm glad because you're a dinosaur.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to. His cartilage is all worn down.
Oh,
I'm surprised
millions
it
of
doesn't just
blood.
just crack.
All right, so you are going to be responsible for knowing the bones. Already know them?
We just learned this.
Just learned it? All right.
No, we
So raise your hand if you could tell me. I'm just going to point to them here.
Alright. Cranium. Humerus.
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 All right, let's raise our hand. What about this one? Edis.
No. Thumb side.
Thumb side.
Radius.
Radius. If you have trouble remembering that, I remember like your thumb can move like in a big circle, which has a radius. The radius is your thumb side.
Yeah, but pinky.
The ulna is on the pinky side. How about these bones? You could feel if you reach behind, touch your same shoulder.
Your
Scapula. How about here? Clavicle.
Ribs.
Sternum, ribs, pelvis, largest bone. Which one's this?
Look at his video.
Tibia. What's this?
Fibula.
Do they rhyme?
Yes.
No.
Wait, I don't.
It's not tibia and fibia.
It's fibula.
It's tibia and fibula.
I have an extra bone in my leg.
So that's most of them. All right, so we could label this. You already went through it.
What about the mandible?
All right, Colin, turn around, be quiet.
Oh, we have to copy this.
Yeah?
We have to know this for the test.
Yes.
Easy.
All right, gonna have an easy quiz, I guess. According to you guys.
Well, so far. Well, you have the word.
Patella, your kneecap is called a patella. Abby?
Will there be a word bank on the test?
No.
Is it all multiple choice?
Oh, it'll still
Oh, vertebrae. We didn't mention vertebrae. The stack of disc-like bones that make up our spine. Did you guys have a quiz on this at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I aced it.
Yeah.
I
I
aced
Alright,
it.
alright.
Oh, yeah.
All right, can we go?
You said you knew all this.
Yeah, everyone knows everything. We learned everything in Howell.
I didn't have to.
I'm not smart though.
Lost my
There you go. Okay, you can move on. Left side.
All right, now where our bones meet and have to move, we have what we call joints, just like when we talked about arthropods, jointed appendages, areas that allow for movement. That's what joints are. And we have several types of movable joints. And we also have some other types of joints which we'll talk about. So the general categories of joints are hinge joints, which just like the hinge on a door, a hinge allows the door to move, but it only moves in one plane of direction. This door only goes back and forth. I can't like tilt one section forward. I can't lift it and move it in another direction. It just goes open and closed. So some of the joints in our body which work like that are what? Yeah, your elbow. Your elbow only moves like this. It's just like the hinge. No, you can't, because if you do this, are you moving your elbow joint?
No, you're moving
No,
like
you're
your
moving
shoulder.
your shoulder.
Yeah.
This joint only works like this. Your knee, same thing, only goes forward and backward. If you're healthy, if you haven't been injured, your knee does not move side to side. Okay, it shouldn't. And the reason, because of those ligaments that help keep your, no, you're moving your hip. If you do this, you're moving your hip. You're actually not moving your knee joint.
You can't make sure that I can go like it.
If you do, you're dislocating your knee or your elbow. Yes. All right.
Why is like the back of Big Lad's head all like weird?
I don't know.
What happened to his jaw?
He's missing a jaw. All right, counselor.
Like look at his. There's all like weird marks on it.
It's just because of the several
He had an
bones that
abusive
make up the
father.
skull.
He's a little dysfunctional, but that's okay.
The ball and socket joint
That's what mom tells me.
are joints that can move in a wider range of motion. They can move in several planes of direction. So examples are the shoulder joint, the hip joint, and we can see if we look at the skeleton that the top of these bones, there's the top which looks kind of like a ball, and it fits into a cup-shaped socket. That's why it's called a ball and socket, and it's held in there by several ligaments and tendons which keep everything together, okay, and allow for the muscles to pull on those joints. but it can give a wider range of motion. Your hip, same thing. If you look at the anatomy of this hip joint, the top of the femur has this large ball that fits in this cup of the pelvis, allowing for that movement. Diksha? Yeah, thumb, our finger joints, our wrist are more complicated joints, that they're made of several joints sort of working together. There's other types of joints we're not going to talk about, like a saddle joint, things like that. So we're sort of simplifying things.
Oh wait, that's what double joints is.
Gliding joints are joints in which the bones rest on top of each other. So an example would be the bones of the vertebrae. The bones are all stacked on top of each other, and each one allows for a slight bit of rotation. And so when they're stacked on top of each other, that's why we can rotate our back, because each of those bones can rotate a little bit, giving us a wider range of motion in our back. Here's a model. I'll pass this
Oh my
around.
god, I just smacked my knee.
So this is a spinal model, and it's, all right guys, listen. So it shows a bunch of vertebrae, and between each one you could see the disc of cartilage, and you could see that there's a little range of motion in each one. Each individual vertebrae doesn't have a very large range of motion, but together they do. This yellow part coming down the middle is the spinal cord. And these discs, if you've ever heard of somebody having a herniated disc, damage to these discs can cause back problems, can cause back pain, can cause sciatica, because these discs help cushion between every vertebrae, allowing for them to slide over each other. If it's damaged, then that can be a problem. If it bulges out, it can put pressure on nerves, causing pain, causing numbness. So those are all things that are affected by those discs of cartilage.
Yeah, can't there be like a lot of inflammation if that happens?
Yeah, there can be. Yeah, the disc can be inflamed.
Yeah.
A pivot joint, an example of that is the top of our spinal column where it attaches to our head. A pivot joint allows for rotational movement, a wide range of rotational movement. There are also some joints in which there's a boundary between two bones, but there's actually no movement. And those are called immovable or fixed joints. And so when you look at the human cranium, it's actually made of several bones that over time during childhood fuse together. But they don't fuse together immediately. So if you ever have had a relative or something, a baby, you may know that on top of their head they have what's sometimes called a soft spot. That's an area where the bones of the cranium have not fused together yet. And so there's a little gap there. Like when you have a baby and if you look at it, if they don't have any hair, you could see their soft spot pulsing with their heartbeat. Okay? And so eventually as they get older, those bones fuse together so that there's no longer a gap there. And part of the reason, as the newborn baby is born in delivery, humans have children, babies, with very large heads in comparison to other animals. And so in order to allow their head to fit through the pelvis, one of the things that an adaptation is those bones have not fused together until after the child is born. And you may have heard of children being born with a cone head, where the bone in the head is misshapen, and that happens very frequently, but it basically typically goes back and goes back into a normal shape after a day or so, because these bones are not, there's some movement there that's allowed. Very safe.
That kid goes to our school. His name is James.
All right, so this is a picture I took.
Oh yeah, Paris, yeah.
So when we were in Paris last last year.
In there, skulls.
Alright, I'm about to tell you, you just gotta listen. So when we were in Paris, there's a, I don't know, you would call it an exhibit, but there's a place that you can go, and it's underground, it's called the Catacombs, and in Paris, what they had to do was they had to basically empty out all of the cemeteries in Paris. I believe it was in the early 1800s, and what they had to do with the bones, they needed something to do with them, so they took what was a mine, where there were underground passageways, and they took all the bones and they brought them down to this mine, and they arranged them in different ways. Like these are all this pillar these are all femurs pointing inward. They're looking kind of the femur. These are skulls and craniums, and they're arranged the hallways of this whole exhibit.
here's my
It's just
collection.
lined with bones.
Back then,
There are millions of, I think they said like the bones of 7 million people are in the catacombs. Here they arrange these skulls into a heart shape.
That's nice.
Very
there's a
cute.
little like movie theater place.
At least
in
they're
there.
like
there's this
not
little
depressed
editor
killers.
and they made seats out of skulls.
Two
And there's a big wall. They can do that.
Oh, all right. Now,
Is it a wall?
No,
No,
in thinking about some damage to the skeletal system, obviously a broken bone or a fracture is when the bone tissue's been damaged. It's often due to some sort of trauma to the bone. And in young people, they sometimes get what are called green stick fractures. And the name comes from, like, if you were to take like a dried up dead branch, you could just snap it in two. But if you take a living live branch and break it, it doesn't just break cleanly. It sort of breaks, but there's this fibrous tissue that still holds it together. Well, in young people, before their bones are fully calcified, sometimes they can get a break, but because there's much more flexibility in the bone tissue, it doesn't break cleanly. It stays sort of partially connected, kind of like a green stick would. A simple fracture is basically a clean break directly through the bone. So this shows an x-ray. So this person, what bone did they fracture?
The humor.
I can't.
This is the
Oh,
femur.
that person.
So
Oh,
this is the pelvis. So this is their femur, and you can see here it's been fractured. It is also displaced. So when a person breaks a bone, so that it can be broken, but it stays basically in alignment. Or it could fracture and then move out of alignment. So this person, first of all, this fracture would be extremely painful. Right? The femur is the largest bone in the body. A fracture of the femur, it takes a great deal of force to actually fracture a femur, and so this would be really painful. And if a person fractures a bone and it's displaced, what does the doctor have to do?
We'll have to do surgery.
Well, they might
They
do
put a
surgery,
rod.
but they might not. They might try to first get those bones back into alignment.
Hold it.
Yeah, for example, in this person, the doctor would likely hold the lower portion of the leg and kind of pull on it and get it and sort of align it back. If they can't do it just by manipulating the person's leg, they might have to do surgery. Sometimes they have to use hardware, screws and bolts and things, rods to get everything. If you've had a complex fracture where the bone's broken in several places, they might have to sort of piece it back together using screws and things like that. And after that's done, as you know, a cast is usually put on it. And a cast basically immobilizes the bones so they're not moving, because bones heal really well. So bone tissue can heal and be basically just like new. So the area where the healing was is not going to be weaker than normal bone tissue. It heals back just as strong. Sometimes it forms a callus on the bone where you could actually, we'll see forever in an x-ray where a person had once broken a bone.
What's a glue?
The what?
There's glue.
It's just glue.
Is it realistic? Do we have to
No.
look at
A compound fracture is when there's been a simple fracture, but it actually, the bone breaks through the skin and is exposed. So obviously, that's a more damaging and traumatic injury, because not only is there damage to the bone, there's damage to the muscle, the blood vessels, the skin, and so forth. All right, so on this next slide, on this next slide, there are some pictures of broken bones.
Oh, nice. Serious?
So if you do not like to see that, you don't have to.
Can I tell a story?
You don't know, well, not right now.
Please, it's a
You
good
don't
story.
have to look.
Yeah,
So-
that's what I was gonna say.
Here you see.
Kevin Ware,
all right,
Kevin Ware,
Listen.
yeah.
Okay.
I
So
was
here
like,
we
I'm
see.
sued.
Jack.
Sorry.
All right. Here we see a person. This is Kevin Ware. I was from the NCAA tournament several years ago. But here's his femur. Here's his lower leg. This is not his knee. Okay. That is his shin.
Thank you.
That is his shin. And so this is his tibia. He broke his tibia when he landed from a jump. And he broke the tibia, and it also pierced through the skin. And so if you saw that when it happened, or if you've seen pictures of his teammates who were freaking out on the bench, it happened right in front of his
Big
bench.
cube.
So it's a gruesome
You can see
injury.
them running.
It's yeah, you can see people kind of like.
You missed the shot.
All right, we're not gonna do those videos.
No, he was
So, yeah.
contesting.
All right, the pictures are over. If you-
And the kid
I-
made a shot.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Undo.
How what? The bones, so yeah, good question, Cassia. So the bones start off as they form, not fully what we call calcified. Calcium is the mineral that makes our bones nice and hard. And in youth, like before puberty, those bones are not fully calcified yet. So after a person reaches puberty, the bones start to calcify in a more significant way, and by the time a person's sort of fully grown, okay, and has reached their full physical maturity, then those bones are fully calcified. When the bone does repair itself, okay, where the damage was, starts off, the blood vessels have been damaged, the bone tissue is damaged. It starts by filling in that gap with new blood vessels and with what's called spongy bone tissue. And then as the healing continues, that spongy bone gets filled in with more compact bone. And like you see in this final picture, when it's fully healed, the blood vessels have healed, and there's still this little enlargement in the area where the break actually is going. Now, sometimes bones, so let me ask you a question, can you break your knee? Can you break your ankle?
Yes.
Yeah. Broken.
What can you break? You can break bones, you can't break joints. So sometimes people say they broke their ankle. What they really did was they broke maybe their tibia or their fibula or a bone in their foot. But you can't break a joint. What you do with a joint is you can dislocate a joint. Dislocation is when the normal arrangement of bones in a joint has been displaced. So what joint is this person dislocated?
No, this is the elbow.
That's an elbow.
Yeah.
So this is the humerus, okay, and this is what bone? Radius and the ulna. And so you can see there's a circular indentation where this part of the humerus should fit in smoothly so that it can bend back and forth. So an extreme blow to one part of the body can cause the joint to be dislocated. And so typically where you would see something like this, if there's been a trauma to some part of the body, if you held your arm out and something hit the lower part of your arm, but not the top part of your arm, it can force your elbow joint out of place. If you go to tackle somebody in football, okay, and you reach your arm out, and there's a big impact on your arm, but the rest of your body stays still, it can force your shoulder out of to be dislocated. And so to fix this, basically the doctor, so this isn't any broken bone. There could be damage to the ligaments around it. But basically the doctor would just grab onto your lower arm, pull it, and reseat this humerus in this joint. It would be painful for a couple seconds, but then typically after a person has relocated the joint, it feels much better afterwards. It's painful when when it's been dislocated, but it feels better once it's back in.
What happens like when the doctor's like pulling it back and something like gets caught and punches it? Does that happen?
I don't know. I don't think not usually, because there's ligaments holding it together that if they haven't been fully torn, they kind of keep it in the place after the doctor gets it in the spot.
Like, if in this picture right here, since it's the radius and that's the elbow,
Yeah.
if this person were to try to bend their arm, would it be possible for like their radius or their ulna to like pierce a ligament?
Probably not. The damage has already been done. Probably to the ligaments when it was moved out of joint. But it would be really painful. Any movement, this bone would be pushing
So
on
that's why
nerves
people
and
like
things.
hold
So
their
people would just hold it like
elbow.
this. You know, and as you do this, the ligaments, when they heal, they don't heal back 100%. So once a person has dislocated a joint, it's easier for it to happen. Like I used to play basketball with a guy who had dislocated his shoulder many times. And so we would be playing basketball and he'd knock into somebody, his shoulder come out of joint, he'd just kind of be like, and put it right back in without a big deal. Because it happened several times, all those ligaments were stretched out, and so it came out of the socket pretty easily. All right, if you don't like pictures, here's a picture that has a dislocated ankle.
I want to show a picture.
So again, this foot should be here. You could see it's been dislocated this way.
It looks like Wile E. Coyote's legs.
All right, we'll pause here for today. No.